without a job, and with a staggering amount of debt. Congratulations. But I actually didn't mean to be funny. I'm serious. You have odds stacked against you. You might have people or data indicating to you that you've made the wrong decision, that you'll have a difficult time paying your student loans, perhaps your other bill. And in this way, your story begins like the very greatest of success stories. To prepare to address you today, I did some research. I scoured the internet and watched about every commencement speech I could possibly find. And so I basically made a graduation speech about graduation speeches. Because what I'll share with you today isn't so much my own story, although I may offer some of my own story at the end. But instead, some of what I understood from these commencement speeches, some that were touted as the best commencement speeches of all time. And that's why I take the opinion very seriously that this is the best time, not the worst time, to be graduating from law school. So I figured, what is one supposed to do in a commencement speech? You're supposed to inspire, you're supposed to motivate, you're supposed to give some practical advice. And I thought, well, inspiring and motivating doesn't really sound like the type of thing that's going to fly with a bunch of future lawyers and their families. And giving practical advice doesn't really come that well from someone like me. So I figured, well, what are you guys in a position to do? You've been trained to analyze facts, and so I figured I would give you some facts. And I also didn't want to paint a picture that was unrealistic. I didn't want to say, well, you're graduating today, so take it all in, your life is great, it's going to be great forever. I have no idea. But I can give you some evidence. So I watched a lot of graduation speeches, probably in the neighborhood of 40 to 50. And I noticed a lot of things that we might call rules or trends. And I picked out 10 to discuss with you today. And these 10 are tenets that seem to tell the stories of the most successful people that you could imagine. So I watched speeches given by, for example, Oprah, and Steve Jobs, and Michael Dell, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, among others. So you can take that with a grain of salt. And this is what they seem to say. Find your passion. So all of these people who've done really, really successful things seem to say that the motivator for any success was being passionate about something. And passion and law don't always seem to go together, at least not at first blush. But if you think back to the moment in a class where you really internalized a particular rule, or maybe it was the moment that you knew you wanted to be a lawyer, there was something inside of you that was passionate. There was a reason that you wanted to do this. Second, you don't have to work hard. I promise you. I'm sure I watched all the speeches. You don't have to work hard in order to get what you want, and you can do whatever you want as of right now. Now, you've spent a few years figuring out that definitions really matter. And so what I just said is true, but of course it depends upon how you define work. Because it seemed to me that in all of these stories, in all of these speeches, people seem to indicate that what their work was their passion. And they didn't feel like they were working particularly hard in order to do it. So you don't have to work hard. But when you try and pick something that's going to challenge you, something that you will call your work even if you don't think of it as work, you'll actually be happiest if you pick something that's going to challenge you, as opposed to just sitting around all day or, perhaps doing what it is that first comes to mind when I said that you don't have to work very hard. Fourth, relationships relationship, whether it was a partner, a family member, or somebody whom they met in the elevator, not expecting that that person would then become the partner with whom they would start Google. So that means to take your relationships really seriously. Those with your family, with your friends, with those that obviously matter to you or should matter to you, but also to be open enough in the world to meet people with whom you can develop meaningful relationships. Fifth, trust yourself. You don't have to listen to other people when you're trying to figure out what to do with your life. And in fact, most of the missteps that I observed when watching these commencement speeches were the result of moves that people made that other people told them to make. So that doesn't mean that if you went to law school because somebody told you to go to law school or somebody else thought it was a good idea that you're, doomed forever. But as you continue to make decisions, it seems, at least from the data, that trusting yourself is the most important way to go. Sixth, don't work for money. Money comes when you do what you love. So in all of these speeches that were given by very, very successful people, people who had made a lot of money, and of course, then you might be thinking, well, right, that's the reason that they say that money doesn't matter. I think there's something to that. But if it's true, right, that people who've made a lot of money, once they've made a lot of money, seem to think that money doesn't matter, then that does seem to indicate that there's a question as to how much money matters, right? So maybe setting aside some level of comfort that one wants to have, once you've achieved that, money doesn't matter. But in any event, they all said it. I'm just here to report. Seventh, helping other people is the key to living a happy and meaningful life. So the notable speeches here were Bono of U2, Oprah, and Bill Gates. All of whom said, after saying that money doesn't matter, said that the greatest joy that they've achieved in their personal but also their professional lives derived from finding a way to make their existences meaningful, and that meaning always happened as a result of what they could do for other people. 8, fail. Failing is essential, so don't be afraid of failing. You've got to try in order to succeed, and sometimes trying means failing. But I noticed 2 things about failure. One, that every single speaker mentioned it specifically in 2 ways. So this is 1A. They mentioned it as a particular thing to strive for, to want to fail. That was one way they mentioned it. The second way they mentioned it was that it is something that so many people are afraid of doing. The second thing about failure, so now we've moved on from 1A and B, we're on to 2. The second thing about failure, big heading of failure, is that all of the speakers, when they were talking about their most proud moments, their biggest successes, they all talked about their failures. They pointed to their failures in order to explain their successes. They were motivated by their failures. Failures seem to matter not just as an end, to strive for not being afraid to fail, that's heading 1, but also as a means. You succeed by virtue of having failed, at least it seems. 9th, visualize in detail what you want. So I'm not going to take us through an exercise of how to do this. And I think that there are tons of books that one could avail oneself of in order to figure out the best way to do this. But a couple of the speeches one figures out what your passion is, what you want, to actually visualize that outcome. Not to think about, well, what if I don't make it? What if I fail? But just for 1 second to assume that you won't fail. And you might fail, but to not be overwhelmed by the fear of failure while you're visualizing. Your visualizing time is when you're allowing yourself to dream. And 10th, and this is to some degree repetitive, but I did want to re-emphasize, that these most successful people, and by all accounts, I think that those who gave these speeches were the most successful people in the world today. We may quibble with whether they should be, but empirically they are. But these most successful people, when discussing their success stories, all trace their success to their failure. So that's my top 10 list. Now I'm going to apply it to your situation. So I started today by saying that you're graduating in the best possible time that you could. And I told you that I meant it, and I still do. And the reason for that is that it seemed that the particular kind of failure that these individuals experienced had to do with a failure that involved something that they didn't really want to do. Somebody told them to do something. They took a path that wasn't quite for them. And then their show got canceled, right? Or they lost all their money, or something happened to them that we would conventionally call failing. And that's when they hit bottom. And they took that opportunity to really reevaluate why it is that they got up in the morning, what really motivated them. And so my hope for you all is that even though there are facts about the world, particularly the legal services market, that continue to be true and that stack odds against you, that you can create your own success stories, that you can continue to try and not be afraid to fail. So one of the other things that most of the commencement speeches said was that there is a high likelihood that those in an audience at a commencement will forget everything that the commencement speaker has said. So I like odds, and I imagine then that you will forget most of what I have said. So with that in mind, I'm not going to try and impart onto you some sort of a message that it's important for you to remember, but instead to just wish you the best. I am so honored to have been able to teach you. I think that you are a class with the type of personality that is exactly suited to create these types of success stories that I watched when I was watching these commencement speeches. So I look forward to hearing from you all the time after you graduate, to hear about your success stories.